Campbell serves as the head of monitoring, review, and reporting at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. She leads efforts in national planning and reporting, capacity building, and monitoring progress toward the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We're thrilled to have Jillian with us today to provide insights into this transformative framework and how we can actively engage with it. You can go ahead, Jillian, when you're ready.
Thanks. Most of you know that the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted at COP15 in Montreal in December of 2002. This sets the basis for global work on and national work on biodiversity policy at these different levels. So the mission of the framework, well, first I'll say the vision of the framework is to achieve sustainability of nature and people. And then the mission here is to take urgent action to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, to put nature on a path to recover by 2030 for the benefit of people and planet. When the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted, it was adopted as a set of 4 outcome-oriented goals and 23 targets. These 23 different targets are clustered into 3 groups. One is on reducing threats, one is on meeting people's needs, and one is on tools and solutions. So the 4 goals of the framework are quite broad, and the first would really relate a lot to the work that you're doing in terms of animal movement, because this first goal includes many different sort of sub-elements. One is on maintaining and increasing the extent of natural ecosystems. Another is on improving the integrity of all ecosystems. Another is on reducing the extinction rate and risk of extinction. Then there's the abundance of native species and on genetic diversity. The second goal is really on nature's contributions to people. So this is related to biodiversity being sustainably used and managed, and nature's contribution to people being valued, maintained, enhanced, or restored. Goal C is on the sharing of benefits, so due to access and benefits arrangements, making sure that different users and countries benefit from genetic resources and digital sequencing information. And the fourth is a different sort of goal because it's more on the means of implementation. So it relates to adequate means of finance, and it also includes capacity building in goal D. And so then this is coupled, and these goals are to 2050, and they aim to guide policy development at the global and national level. And now these are coupled with these 23 different targets. So the first 8 targets are related to reducing threats. I'll point out a few of these here. One is target 4, which has to do with halting species extinction, protecting genetic diversity, and managing human-wildlife conflict. As you can see, this would also be highly related to the work that you're doing. But there are, of course, links to other topics as well, including invasive alien species, sustainable use and trade, conservation. Target 9 to 13 really are related to meeting people's needs. And so this is managing wild species to benefit people, sustainable agriculture, again, maintaining or restoring nature's contribution to people, enhancing green space. I skipped target 13, but I'll come back to it because it relates to a specific protocol of the convention, same with target 17. And then once you go from target 14 plus, these are more on tools and solutions. So you can see that you have targets here related to activities of businesses, sustainable consumption, including biodiversity and decision-making processes at different levels of government, addressing harmful subsidies. And then here where we have target 13, as I mentioned, this is related also to the protocol that we have, the Nagoya Protocol and access and benefit sharing. So there's a dedicated target on that, and there's a target on biosafety. There's also a dedicated protocol of the convention, the Cartagena Protocol, which is on that topic. Then you have additional targets related to finance, capacity building, knowledge, and ensuring participation of IPLCs, women, and different groups in the decision-making process. I'll come back to target 21 really quickly. So this target, ensuring that knowledge is available to guide biodiversity action. This is something that we have been also working on with GeoBond. There's another number of indicators that are related to the work that we do with GeoBond or that might be useful for your group. So in target 21, we're trying to devise an indicator for how do we assess whether or not there is data availability. Is that data being used? Does it cover the range of species that would be necessary in order to make informed decisions? And so we are working on this. This is something that is progressing over time, and maybe some of you are interested in getting involved in. So this is the structure of the framework. But a global framework is only worth so much, right? Because the global framework has been developed in order to guide national decision making. And so in addition to the framework itself being adopted, there were these decisions that were adopted at the same level of the framework. And I'm going to focus on the monitoring framework and on the mechanisms for planning, monitoring, review, and reporting, which these are the areas that I work on. And these really describe how the framework gets nationalized and what countries should be doing in order to pick the framework up and develop national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And as you can imagine, as I said, I mean, a global framework is useful for getting countries involved, and it's useful for getting this commitment. However, the action really does happen at the national or even subnational level. And so ensuring that there's follow through and ensuring that this gets taken up is the teeth of the framework itself. And so in the decisions on planning, monitoring, review, and reporting, there is a request to parties to rapidly align their national biodiversity strategies and action plans with the framework by COP16, which has already taken place. And so we have had 123 countries that have submitted their national targets aligned with the global framework. So this does show that countries are very much taking on board the global targets. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do and setting their own national targets so that they can move forward. And this is something that is part of the decision-making itself. And then each COP will review the implementation of the framework up until the conclusion of the framework. There's also a request to align the NBSAPs with other conventions. I know that you have CMS on the line as well, so that the NBSAPs include not only the work that would be necessarily to achieve the Global Biodiversity Framework, but that the NBSAP is an umbrella tool, or ideally seen as an umbrella tool for promoting work on biodiversity across the national government, ensuring that it's synergistic with plans that they may be developing for other conventions.
Jillian,
So,
could I ask you to
yeah.
quickly explain NBSAP a little bit more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what the NBSAP is an NBSAP is each country's attempt to say what they're going to do on biodiversity. And so the structure of these may vary, and it usually would include a somewhat similar structure to the global framework itself, where a country will then sit down and say, okay, well, at the global level, we have committed to restoring 30%. What are we going to do at the national level? What percentage of our ecosystems are we going to restore? What type of restoration? Where are those going to be? Who are the partners that are going to make it happen? What financing do we have available for achieving this? And so the NBSAPs are meant to be very practical plans that say, okay, what do we do next? And the countries are the ones that develop these. As I mentioned, so we've had 123 countries submit national targets that are aligned with the global targets. So this means that all of those countries have gone through some exercise to say, okay, well, what are we going to do on target 1, which relates to spatial planning? What are we going to do on target 2, which relates to restoration? What are we going to do on target 3, which relates to protected areas? And so that exercise of defining the specific policy actions is the process of developing an NBSAP. And there's guidance on how an NBSAP should look. And so this is some of this. So the guidance that COP provided to countries was that they would first map their existing national targets from previous plans to the global framework, identify how well it matches, where are their gaps, what do they need to do, and then to go through and revise and update the NBSAP with the GBF. Now, I mentioned that 123 have submitted targets, but actually we've only had 46 countries submit the full NBSAP. So what this means is that some of the targets that have been submitted are maybe draft, or maybe some of the countries are still looking at specific targets, or they're still looking at the institutional arrangements necessary to make it happen. So this is sort of the stage that we're at now. This is much faster than happened in the last framework, the ACHIP framework. It took on average 5 years for a country to develop any sort of plan. And so then by that time, the framework was, kind of coming to an end. And so it's a much better situation now that we're in. I see somebody's asking about where they are. Maybe at the end of this, I'll just show you quickly the portal where you can find everything NBSAP related. And then countries are also requested in developing their NBSAP to have a whole of society, whole of government approach. So looking at across different ministries, trying to engage different non-state actors, the private sector, academia, to make sure that the NBSAP is really a national strategy and not just a Ministry of Environment strategy. This is the idea behind it. And something that is new is that countries are also asked to identify indicators that they're going to use for monitoring the NBSAP. So I will say when the ACHIP framework was adopted back in 2010, monitoring received a lot less attention. And so there wasn't a whole lot of guidance on what countries would have to do in terms of monitoring the previous round of NBSAPs. And in terms of the national reporting to the convention, there was no specific request for data. So countries were encouraged to include indicators, but it was sort of a random, just, send us whatever you want. And so when you look at the national reports, we had like 23 countries that submitted any sort of a data series. So it was very small. So this was something that the countries saw as a need, and this has led to the adoption of a monitoring framework, which now is a standardized way to encourage countries to report data on specific topics in order to monitor their NBSAP. So I'll come and I'll talk more about this in a bit. There is a lot of guidance on the NBSAP and stresses that it should be coherent with national circumstances. I mentioned that it should be synergistic with other multilateral environment agreements and conventions. And really, of course, the focus is on promoting and supporting increased efforts and actions over time. And so then the legal obligation that countries have under the convention is to report progress at specific intervals. So the first national report on the GBF is going to be due a year from now in February of 2026. And so that's when the first national reporting is due. And this is countries' first opportunity to say, what have they actually done? So in terms of how the process works, they develop their NBSAP, they say what they're going to do, which is that NBSAP and the national targets. And then in 2026, they said, okay, now, well, what have we done so far to progress this along? And it's very much based on those national targets that they have submitted. And countries need to then, as I said, report on those exact same targets, describe the concrete actions that they've taken, and then they need to report indicators and monitoring information related to those targets. So I think I skipped a slide. I'm in my presentation when I was thinking through it. Sorry about that. But so the monitoring framework defines exactly what it is that countries would then monitor in this section on national monitoring and assessment. And in terms of what this monitoring framework looks like, is countries agreed on a list of indicators for monitoring each goal and target. And there are different levels of indicators. There's headline indicators, component indicators, and complementary indicators, which are all quantitative indicators. And then there's what we call binary indicators, which are really a series of questions that we could then assess, use to assess progress at the global level. So the headline indicators are a standard part of the national reporting to the convention. So the idea is that each country would use these headline indicators to measure progress on their NBSAP, and they would then report data to the convention during those reporting rounds. This is part of the reporting templates which countries have adopted, and as I mentioned, it's actually a legal obligation of countries to report. So there's a big focus on reporting. At the time that we did the assessment for what can we measure on the different goals and targets, I would say that there's not, data related to wildlife movement. I don't think we're quite there in terms of actually saying this is something that each country could report on. But indicators that some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with that are part of the work of GeoBond would be this genetic diversity indicator that maybe you've seen. It's been worked on a lot by Sean Hoban and that group, and I'm not sure if they have a name like you guys do. And then there's the indicator on invasive alien species, which is also coming from the essential biodiversity angle. There's the red list. And so it is very much a focus on national reporting. So this would be aiming to get countries to embrace the national red listing process so that they are really focusing on the species that are important to them. So those are a few examples. I'll give more in a minute. Then there's also these component and complementary indicators. The component indicators in particular are recommended for countries to consider using. However, they maybe don't cover the whole scope of a goal or a target, or there's other reasons why every country might not really be able to do it. And so countries are encouraged, but it's not part of the reporting template. And then the complementary indicators are a much longer list of indicators that countries might want to consider reporting when they're reporting on the goals and the targets, or that they might want to use when they're trying to evaluate progress towards the NBSAP and evaluate how they target their actions. Now, the binary indicators are not really indicators at the national level. They are indicators sort of at the global level. So it's things like the number of countries who have developed administrative, legislative, or policy frameworks for biosafety. So in order to determine this, we would ask a country a series of questions related to, do they have a policy? These would be yes, no type of questions. There's a little bit of a gradient there. And then we would be able to use that to say this many countries are taking action, appropriate action on this particular target. So as I said, those are not really indicators, they're something else, but they're part of this monitoring framework. So as I mentioned, the way that it works then is that countries are encouraged to use these indicators to develop their NBSAP and to monitor it. The headline indicators and the binary indicators are part of the reporting template. And then there's an optional way for countries to include any other indicator that they choose, whether it's component, complementary, or they can include a national indicator and upload data on that. And then when we do the global review, there's an analysis of progress that will be based on these indicators primarily. So it is very much a shift to having a more quantitative approach to monitoring the convention and ensuring that we're actually able to see the progress at the national and global level. And so for each indicator, there's guidance that's prepared, there's metadata that describes what the indicator is, what it looks like, the rationale for it, relevant definitions, computation methodology. And then these metadata are quite short, 3 or 4 pages. And so most of them, of course, then include a long list of references of where you could go to get more information on the methodology, because as you can imagine, methodologies are often quite lengthy documents. And so this is what we're providing, and this is a list of the headline indicators, which you can see. It has the red list of ecosystems, the extent of natural ecosystems, the red list index. There's quite a lot of them. I should mention some of the work on these indicators, particularly on the binary indicators, has not yet been adopted because COP16 closed without a decision on these indicators. And so we're resuming COP16 next month, and there will then be an adoption of this information. There was an adopted list in COP15, but it had some caveats on where more work was to be done, and then that work has been done. But now we have this this issue that COP ran out of time and is going to resume in February. This is the website that you can go to see all of the NBSAPs. So if you go to ort.cbd.int, then you can see the national targets, and I don't know why it didn't load properly, but you can see these are the 123 countries I mentioned. These are the NBSAPs. You can download them. If you want to click on any particular country, you could see all of the targets for that country. And then you can see what indicators, since I know that you guys are also working on indicators, you can see what indicators they attached. So for instance, the Philippines submitted this target on the participation of IPLCs. The headline indicators are already sort of automatically attached to it, but they actually went through and they are the ones that chose these things. So they chose the proportion of the population with secure tenure. They added these different indicators in. And then these indicators are ones that they would have typed in because they are only relevant for the Philippines. And so you can even see that that they've typed this in, and this is referring to, I don't know what P, A, and B is, but I'm guessing Philippines something, right? So for those of you who are working at the Wild Labs, if you are working with the country on particular indicators, that country could also type these indicators in, the name of the indicator, and then once you've typed in the name at the reporting stage, it will ask you if you can share any data, either through a URL, or you can upload a table, or you can, we're trying to design a way to accept different data structures.
Wonderful.
So I think I will leave it at that, which was already probably a lot.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, Jillian. I think we have a trove of information to go through.